Welcome to Misteyre Creations. This is the finale for Season 2. We are doing a different format this time, more like a documentary. Craigdarroch Castle is one of our favourite landmarks, and they've gave us access to the building to film. I'm talking to John Hughes, the Executive Director of Craigdarroch Castle, today. We visited this castle several times and have learned more each time. We love it, and we hope you do too. Please enjoy. Welcome to the show, John. Nice to have you on.
Thank you, Alan. Very happy to be here.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do for Craigdarroch Castle?
Sure, thanks for that. Yeah, so I'm executive director here. I've been with the organization coming up on 15 years. Started out as operations manager, and almost the last dozen or so I've been executive director. So my job here basically is sort of complete oversight for the business. Budgeting, HR, we're a small organization, so we all wear many hats, and a lot of them fall on my head. But with the pandemic and adjusting staff sizes and stuff, I'm also on the floor giving the tours and greeting the visitors, and everything from soup to nuts, as they say.
Excellent. Can you tell us a little bit about Craigdarroch Castle itself and its history?
Sure, yeah, I'd be happy to do that. The castle itself now is a National Historic Site, and Robert Dunsmuir is a person of national historic significance. So, our reason for being here is to tell the story of a Robert Dunsmuir, but also be the secondary stories, because after Joan Dunsmuir passed away, the building passed into other hands. Was the military hospital. Victoria College, now the University of Victoria, started in the building and was here for 25 years. After that, school board offices, Conservatory of Music, and Castle Society. So it's quite a broad history. And for those people visiting who maybe have less interest, say, in the Victorian era, we've got First World War stuff, we've got things from the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, and so it's a very broad storyline that we offer our visitors. And of course, our primary reason for being here is to preserve the building and to tell stories of the inhabitants.
That's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about Robert Dunsmuir?
Sure. Yeah. Robert, interesting story. I mean, Robert and Joan came over from Scotland in 1851, working as coal miner for, Robert was as a coal miner for the Hudson's Bay Company. Back in Scotland, Robert's family were moving out of the working class and sort of getting into the new wealth that was coming out of the industrial age. Robert's father owned leases for coal mines and was a practical coal miner, understood that. Robert had a formal education in school and then went into the family business to understand the practical side of coal mining. So when he came over here to Vancouver Island, it made a lot of sense. He understood the business side of things and the practical side of things. So they took the contract with Hudson's Bay Company. A few years after that, they started out in Fort Rupert, came down to the Nanaimo area, which is where Robert found his first coal mine. So Wellington Mine was his first one. Going independent, it was actually a very rich coal seam, higher grade than what Hudson's Bay was pulling out of the ground. So he built his business, was selling to the Royal Navy, ended up opening up sales offices in San Francisco, was selling coal for home heating fuel and that across North America. So, really, really diversified. And although he came here with, quote, nothing, he did come here with, as I say, that business understanding and the practical application of coal mining.
Yeah. It's interesting how many people in Canadian history basically come to Canada with almost nothing and then builds empires.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
It's just interesting how that happens quite often.
It is, yeah, and I
Um,
think you see that across North America because whether you're talking about the Winchesters or the Vanderbilts or whatever it would be, these
yeah.
people come over and they're opening up a new frontier, quite literally, and so this is what happens for the lucky few.
Can you tell us a little bit about Joan Dunsmuir?
Yeah, Joan. I wish we knew a little bit more about her. She comes across as a fascinating lady. She was the daughter of a spade maker in Kilmarnock. Robert married her. She followed him to the island because he was starting his businesses and with the coal mining here. And when they came over on the journey, she had two little children and was pregnant. So, I mean, you think about the sort of personal fortitude that it takes to spend 160 days, 180 days on a sailing ship while pregnant with little children, ending up with scurvy and having a child, and then 9 days later at the top end of the island in a log cabin with a dirt floor at Fort Rupert looking for coal. It sort of starts to build this picture of a woman that, was committed to making things work and
Yeah.
at the end of it all, I mean, they had two boys and eight girls, so 10 children in all. So she was a busy lady as far as raising the children, and seems to have been very involved in supporting Robert's initiatives in business as he built out his business. Seems to have been fairly involved with Robert in the decisions around the building of Craigdarroch. We're still doing a lot of research on that, so there's information coming to light that we're not totally clear on, but she doesn't seem to have been passive in her participation with the business and the construction of the building and their homes and political decisions that Robert made.
She kind of stood on her own a bit.
Excuse me. Yeah, very much so. Very much so. Yeah. When Robert passed, she continued to use the estate funds to invest in local businesses. She invested in electric companies and things like that. So, on that end of things, she seemed to understand business and want to see the community grow.
Okay. And how many of her children survived to adulthood?
Actually, all 10 survived. There was one other that doesn't get mentioned often. There was one child lost in childbirth, so 11 children in total, but two boys and eight girls out of all of that did survive and to adulthood.
That is a rarity for that time period and for the hardships that they went through in the beginning,
Yes, absolutely.
let alone any of the travel between, because it wouldn't have been by car. It would have been by carriage
Yep.
at the most, or horseback most likely.
Yeah, exactly. And the journey back and forth between St. Nanaimo and Victoria, I don't know how often she made it. Robert did it fairly regularly, and I suspect as the kids were growing up that Joan would have made that journey as well. I suppose sometimes on ship, rather than over the roads that were still being built.
True, probably quicker by ship to go from Nanaimo to Victoria. It'd probably be a couple hours,
I
probably
would think
half a
so.
day.
Yeah, I would think so. Yes. Yeah.
That's excellent. Can you tell us about James Dunsmuir?
Yes, James, and he's another interesting personality. He was the first child born here. That's what Joan was pregnant with James on the journey here.
Okay.
I believe his birthplace was actually Vancouver, Washington, which is where the Pekin landed, and then from there they went up to Fort Rupert. So yes, James was born on this side of the ocean. Went on to assist his father with the coal mining business. We do know that as Robert became more successful in coal mining and decided to take on more civic responsibilities, got into the political end of things, representing Nanaimo at the Legislative Assembly. He handed off more of the coal mining day-to-day operational duties to James. James stumbled a fair bit coming out of the gates with making some bad decisions as sort of minor relationships, and there was a nasty strike, and Robert had to get involved to sort of help James out of it. And it was messy and nasty, but I think James also learned his lessons on that. He went on to support further business opportunities with both his father and his brother, who was running the sales offices in San Francisco. James went on into politics as well, ended up becoming premier of the province and then lieutenant governor, which was higher than Robert went in politics. So, when you look at the Dunsmuir family as a whole, not only was it business that we're talking about the development of the political climate
Yeah.
and set up within the province.
And can you tell us a little bit more about the achievements James made?
Sure. I think the ones that probably come more to mind, politically speaking, is we know that both Robert and James were against the head tax that were being proposed for the Chinese community.
Okay.
They both seem to feel that they deserved a right to vote and be more involved in the community, and that the head tax, A, was not correct, and B, was a federal thing, not something that the province should be getting involved in.
Yeah.
There is some sense from writings that we have that one of the reasons that James stepped down as lieutenant governor early was that there was a distinct reluctance to sign off on the documents coming out of government for this head tax, and that it was he decided that don't want to play this game. This is not something I agree with or support. I don't think it's in our purview or correct in any way. So that's I think something that often gets missed when you talk about employing Chinese labor for the coal mines and all of this. So yes, they took advantage of cheap labor force, but at the same time they seem to have this desire to include them in a different way in the community than perhaps mainstream government was going. So we've shared that information with the Chinese community and the museums out there, and some things that they were perhaps not aware of. So I think that in and of itself is a success or a different perspective of James than perhaps the community is aware of.
Yeah, I've never heard that about him.
Yeah.
And it with his mother, and that I kind of expected the morality to be strong. I think the two of them, his mother and him, had a falling out at one point and didn't speak the
Yeah, they
rest of
did.
her days.
That's correct. Yes, and that mess, shall we say? I think that's probably the the best word you can use for that. Is it came out actually of his younger brother Alexander's will. When Robert died, he left. He told the boys that he would leave them the businesses, and we actually have that will. It's been written. Robert never signed it. The will that he had signed left everything to Joan. So
Okay.
the boys, after Robert died, the boys basically continued to work for their mother, and she kept everything in play the way it was set up when Robert had before Robert passed, and which means that whatever they wanted to do, they almost needed Mom's permission to do. They didn't have their own income; they couldn't go against her because that would affect their livelihood. Um, and eventually, they did convince her to sell a couple of the coal mines to them so that they would have their own income. They could stand on their own 2 feet. Unfortunately, Alexander died shortly after, getting a hold of the mines, and he left his estate to his brother James to administer. Well, Joan was under the impression that if one of the kids predeceased her, she would get that portion of the estate, would return to her, that portion of the coal mines would come back to her.
Okay.
And because of that, she ended up suing her son, James, who was premier at the time. So that made the headlines in the newspaper.
I can imagine.
Premier's mother sues him, kind of thing. Essentially, it was because of Alexander's will that James and his mother got into this nasty legal battle. And yes, you're correct. They did not speak. Although when Joan passed away, James did go to the funeral, and the story is that he broke down at the gravesite crying, and it was not about the money. It was just, I think it was a big mess, and sort of,
Loss.
I'm an adult, and my sisters don't need me or my money or any of this, and you have plenty, and we're not 100% certain what the rationale was, but there does still seem to have been some very strong emotional ties to the mother, and the mess got in the way.
I think even the average family, stuff like that happens.
Oh yeah.
Just little spats happen, and when the parent goes, siblings who have been estranged tend to break down and have regrets about not talking to that parent, or at least being able to say goodbye.
Yes, I think so. I think you're quite right. Yeah, I mean, we find that when talking to the visitors on the floor, when you relate some of these stories, and they look and go, "Oh yeah, we have family members who do this," or that was something that happened in our community. There was a family that went through this very same thing. So I think as much as things change, they still stay the same in that regard.
Yeah, it's always relatable.
Yep, absolutely.
We talked about a little bit about how they made their fortune. It was mostly in the coal industry, but
Mhm.
were there other and like with Joan, she invested in the electric
Yeah.
uh, company, but is there other companies that they?
Yes, absolutely. So initially, as you say, the coal mining was sort of where the core money came from, where the rapid wealth building happened. To move the coal between his port and the San Francisco sales offices, Robert invested in some merchant shipping.
Mm.
So that he could move stuff back and forth. He bought into Albion Ironworks, which was making stoves and those sorts of things. And then when the quite controversial, what we refer to as the land grab happened, where Robert committed to building the railroad on the island. The federal government decided that they wouldn't. He said he wouldn't do it for free, and essentially it was given a third of the island in lumber and mineral rights, and about $175,000
Yeah,
to build the E&N Railroad. Well, it was the Albion Iron Works, the company that he owned, that built the track for the railroad that he owned. So he understood vertical integration and owning various levels of companies to build what you wanted to build.
yeah,
And obviously, that whole federal land grab is very much front and center when we're talking about reconciliation and
yeah,
misappropriation of lands without consent and all those sorts of things. So, that Robert was a beneficiary of that sort of federal action that is sort of part of our story as well. Um, he did invest in other mortgages and assisted electric companies and other businesses to build out. He owned a mill, so at the Crofton Mill. It was
yeah.
actually, I believe, it was his son-in-law that started it, and Robert foreclosed on him because he wasn't doing very well and took it over and ran that mill. So the Crofton Mill is spun out of the Dunsmuir family.
Okay.
So yeah, quite a few businesses, quite a few diverse businesses for sure. But as I say, it was cold. It was the sort of very foundation and where everything built off of. Interestingly enough, if you think about it from a development perspective, Robert was building trestles for the railroad. He was building wharves for the ships. He was building Craigdarroch Castle. So Dunsmuir and Sons would have been one of the largest land developers in the province at that time. So because they're building structures, they had to build all the buildings that went with the coal mines and the businesses and things. So I think he was very well aware of what went into building things when he decided to build Craigdarroch.
And the construction of the castle, how did that come to be?
So it seems to be that it was sort of we refer to it to our visitors as it was Robert and Joan's retirement home.
Yeah.
They'd moved to several different ones from Nanaimo to Fairview and so on. But Robert, by the time he started building the castle, was in his 60s. He died at the age of 63.
Okay.
So, I mean, you're coming to the end of certainly a political career. I would imagine he would have exerted business control until whenever. But certainly, it seems also to have been an opportunity to help grow the business in that it is this large statement of wealth. If even if Robert and Joan did not come from a world where their homes were decorated in this fashion, they were rising so quickly that people that they were doing business with, the political people with a business, what have you, would have been familiar with these spaces. So it made sense to have that. And it's end of the Victoria era was very much this era of dynastic marriages. looking for families, trying to sort of amass new wealth through
Yeah.
marriage. And the three youngest daughters that moved into the castle with Joan had not yet married. And as an example, Jessie Dunsmuir married into the Jameson whiskey family. So, they
Okay.
got an influx of cash and were able to perhaps do some improvements to their properties and lands. And Jesse went over there, and we're still in touch with that family. They still give us things, relationships for the descendants and stuff are still out there. So I guess in that sense, the building did its job, and that she married quite well compared to, say, some of her older sisters who married when the businesses were still building and the castle did not exist. As far as the construction itself, we're still trying to understand. I mean, it was an American architect
Yeah.
out of Portland. Initially, we thought it was Warren Williams. It seems to have been his firm, certainly, but now we have a better sense that it was his partner, Arthur Smith, and William's son, who did most of the work on Craigdarroch. Recently, in the last few years, found out stained glass windows came from a company in San Francisco, Pacific Art Glass. Turns out they also did Winchester House, so there's some comparisons between those two houses and the windows there, which is great because for 40 years we had no idea who made the windows, and now we have a much better idea that it was Pacific Art Glass. The interior ordered from a catalog from a company in Chicago. 2,100 prefab panels show up on 5.5 rail cars. That makes it into the newspaper. That's front page news. The
Yeah.
Woodford Dunsmuir's castle has arrived kind of thing. And you've got, parquetry flooring from Boston. So much sort of North American manufacturing influence within the castle itself, and the technology. Electricity, gas, hot water heating, burglar alarm, intercom, telephone. So, I mean, this building was, a true statement of wealth, and really was one of the most modern buildings around at the time.
Trying to remember when I was there. It didn't have the gas fixtures, did it?
It did, yes. They were combination fixtures. Many of them were combination fixtures. So electricity, gas in one. You could run both electricity and gas at the same time. So you could have your chandeliers fully lit both ways.
Okay.
Yeah, so it came with that. And they were actually running two power systems for that. They had direct current for the electricity.
Mm-hmm.
And then they were running a low voltage system to power the intercom system, the light switches for the gas lighting. So a little bit like our barbecues today, when you turn on the gas flow and then you hit the little button and it makes a spark and it lights the light. They had a system that would do that sort of thing in the castle. Not for all the gas lights, but for some of the main rooms like the drawing room and stuff like that. So, it was pushing the bounds of technology at the time.
That's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
And the connection to the Winchester house is an interesting angle that I didn't expect. Are there any other?
Neither did we.
Oh, it's wonderful when little nuggets of information come to you like that. Are there other little nuggets that you can share with us a bit?
Not at this point in time, actually. There's a lot of research being done, and it's we have a volunteer researcher, Jim Wolfe, who determined who made the stained glass windows, and he's been working on the construction of Craigdarroch. And he's hinting at a lot of new information, and if nothing else, tidying up some of the information we have and adding a bit more depth to it. But we haven't seen the research yet. So we're all sort of sitting on the edge of our chairs now going, come on, Jim, what can you share so that we can share it with our people? But, just trying to connect the dots as to who beyond like A.H. Andrews and the woodworking or Pacific Art Glass. So many people worked on the castle, and my sense is that we're about to find out more about perhaps more of the day-to-day laborers and the designers of the grounds, and more than just Hugh Campbell's journal that we have. So I think there's, in the next year or so, we're expecting a deluge of information coming out.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, it's very exciting. It's just like, you wish it would hurry up, but at the same time, you want it to be true and proved out so that we know when we share it with people, it is correct.
It is correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's one of our headaches that we have to deal with quite often. We take, when we're doing research, we take up to 10 different sources on one subject and kind of vet them against each other and see where there's comparisons and contrasts, and where it compares, that's usually the truth. Because
right.
consensus wouldn't exist without it being a solid
Hmm.
subject. So I
Hmm. And
really
yeah, for us or for Jim,
yeah
if he's chasing things like did this person come to Victoria at this time? Well, the only proof is that the name gets mentioned in a shipping manifest as a passenger, or that a shipment from this location or this company arrived in Victoria at this time, and the only place it ever could have gone would have been Craigdarroch or this other house. And then you've got to check, is it this house or that house? And yeah, it's tenuous stuff. Is chasing tiny little breadcrumbs. And as you say, you want to find a half a dozen of these things
yeah.
that line up before you can say we're fairly certain this is correct.
What was the cause of Robert's death? Was it just old age, or was it a specific illness?
It appears to be a kidney illness, excess uric acid. People say complications from gout, that kind of thing. So it was definitely a medical condition that happened. If I remember correctly, it appears that he was being treated by a doctor, and was basically told, "Oh, you're going to be fine. You'll get over this. This is okay." And he seemed to be preparing to go back to work, and then suddenly he was not. So whatever that illness was, it either came back in a vengeance, or it was misdiagnosed, but it was definitely kidney related.
Okay, it's that type of a disease that anything can happen just on the flip of a switch, basically.
Yep, yep.
Uh,
And then on Joan's part, it was just old age. She was in her early 80s when she passed away, and it was truly old age, not an illness of any kind.
for a lady who lived so hard in her younger
Hmm.
years, I can understand why she waited until she couldn't wait any longer, and then
Yeah,
said, "Okay, I've done my bit."
that's right. Yeah, so all of the daughters married, and everybody settled, and things sorted out, and yeah, yeah.
So when Joan died, apparently none of the children wanted the castle.
There were five daughters still alive to inherit the estate that were named in Joan's will. I also believe there was a couple of grandchildren. Um, as I mentioned earlier, Jessie married into the Jameson family, so she was over in Ireland. Her sister Effie was diagnosed with a mental illness and was in an institution in England. Um, Jessie's other sisters had homes on the island. Nobody had the money in a lump sum to pay everybody else out and take over the castle, because she would have
Okay.
had to settle the will and make sure that everybody was compensated. I think for people like Jesse, you're in Ireland on a very ancient estate. Um, Getting back to the castle, even as a summer home, would be very, very difficult. It's not, hopping
Yeah.
on a plane like we do today, right?
No,
So I
no.
think ultimately it was the practicality and the ability to afford to either buy everybody out or even just maintain the castle. So the decision was that they would sell it off, and then they went through that whole real estate thing where they couldn't sell the 28 acres with the castle on it. So they divided the acreage into 144 lots. I think it was 3 lots were sold, and it was going so slowly that the real estate agent said to the daughters, "We need an incentive." So the castle was made a prize. If you bought a lot, your name went into a draw. When all of the lots were sold, they pulled one name out of the hat, and that person was given the castle.
Okay.
So, that's how it sort of moved out of the family and into its various institutional occupants, was the fact that it was given away as a prize, used as collateral for business loans lost to the bank, and so on and so on. So it really was just the desire, I think, of the daughters to split the estate fairly, and the only way to do that was to sell off the
So,
land. Yeah.
did it ever go into disrepair in that process?
Yeah, it was never fully empty, but there were stages in its life that it was not well looked after. And James K. Nesbitt was the founder of the Castle Society back in 1959, and his impetus for doing that was he loved history, first off, but he noticed the building was starting to deteriorate. More so from the outside, when you take a look at, their wooden windows, wooden frames. If the paint's not maintained, they start to get squishy and rot. And he thought that nobody was doing a proper job of looking after that sort of thing. So he started the Society for the Preservation of Craigdarroch Castle. way back then. It took him 10 years to get into the building. And then, of course, we've spent the last 40 odd years, our curator's been here 47 years, sort of looking after the building and putting it back to rights. And of course, it continues to age and deteriorate around you. And we're fixing things from back then and chasing our tails on, staying on top of it if we can. So, but it never got derelict. It was never completely empty. It was not, all windows broken and the wind blowing through the place. It wasn't to that degree of decrepitness.
It was livable.
Yeah, because it was pretty much always occupied. I mean, I think with Mr. Cameron put his brother in as a caretaker, so for about 9 years there was one person sort of living in the place and generally maintaining the inside and the grounds a bit. But after that, with the military hospital, they made some drastic changes, and of course, being Canadian government, there was a fair bit of maintenance and changes done to it, upgrading of plumbing and those sorts of things. And then with the college in for 25 years, so there's 25 years of occupancy. And yes, the kids are hard on it, and we have some pretty cool graffiti in the woodwork. But that being said, they still had to maintain the building and keep it safe, and they put fire escapes on, and those sorts of things. After that, school board. Again, it was the main central office, and then with the Castle Society and the conservatory is when the maintenance for the exterior probably started to happen, and more earnest efforts on that anyway.
Okay. The interior is quite beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
The woodwork is, I'm an architectural designer by trade, so when I looked at that, I was salivating just looking at it, because I know how much work goes into that, and we don't see that type of interior much anymore. And we're not likely to.
No.
So
it's a shame, and I think a lot of that's the changing aesthetics. We take like clean lines and big bright windows, and we've lost that desire to embellish every surface. Like the castle, I say to our visitors, they say, well, there's so much to look at. As I guess no surface is left untouched as far as detail goes. And we've moved away from that as a society. Our design trends are different now.
Yeah, more simple.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think our complications now tend to be much more in the infrastructure, behind the walls, behind the scenes, the pre-wiring, the technology, all of the air movement and all that sort of stuff that didn't exist in the Dunsmuir time. It seems to be where our complications lie now.
Yes, for sure. Is there any like secret passages or weird quirks to the building?
That's a really good question. It's actually one we get quite a bit from visitors. I think people think of houses, Victorian houses, but probably not as large as Craigdarroch, where maybe you open what looks like a closet door and there's a tiny little staircase that will take you to the main bedroom or something like that. But really, the building itself, start to finish, was built in 3 years and 1 month. When Robert died, the boys had essentially a year to finish the interior. The 3 daughters took Joan on a tour of Europe and said to their brothers, look, when Mum comes home, she's moving in. Get it done. So, a lot, as I said, a lot of this stuff was pre-ordered from catalogs, out of Boston or Chicago or whatever. Following the plans was put in place. Joan moved in. So there wasn't any time to plan those sorts of things. And B, if you look at the way Craigdarroch is built, there's very definitely sort of the public showy side where your guests would have stayed and the nice bedrooms and stuff were. And then there's the true working side of the house, private side, servant side, however you want to frame that. And the servants themselves had a flight of stairs top to bottom with a dumbwaiter and a laundry chute. So the need to open a door and go through to another part of the house didn't exist, because they had a complete side of the building. Probably about a third of the square footage was dedicated to that support mechanism.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. So we have, I will say that we've added a couple of little secret cubbies ourselves,
Yeah.
and that's primarily for maintenance. So the guys have taken some of the wainscoting off so that we can actually safely remove it. The visitors don't know it's there. It looks like it's all intact, but there is a way to pop it off because we need to check, that the joists and the roof beams and all of that sort of stuff and the way it's connected to the masonry, and we can do maintenance checks and make sure that there's no rot and that sort of thing. So they've created little neat secret access points so we can have a look at it, but it didn't come with the house.
The things you have to do to keep the thing working
Absolutely.
properly.
Yeah.
Your tours. What tours do you offer?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. Because the last couple of years has certainly been challenging. We used to be open 7 days a week. We dropped right down to 3 days a week, and now in the summer we're certainly up to 5, which is awesome. And we're doing the self-guided tours for the most part, so people can just show up at the visitor center. There's no timed arrivals now. We've eased up on that. So arrive at the visitor center, buy a ticket, do a self-guided tour. We have our volunteers and our staff around to assist people, answer questions. They get a floor map and a history. So that's our typical standard tour. We have started some specialty tours, and one that is actually active right now is called Craigdarroch Castle in 21 Treasures. And it's the 21 Treasures tour based on the book that was written by our president, Myra Dan.
Okay.
Essentially what happens is we cap it at 12 participants because the rooms are small and we want to have an intimate conversation with our guests and give them a slightly different perspective of the building. People on that tour see everything that a self-guided tour does, but we focus on specific objects that are identified in the book. And people go in now at 9:30. We open the doors to the public at 10. So for the first half hour, you've got the building to yourself and a personal guide to take you through. So that's a fun one that we're doing. We've got one that we're trying to develop. It's not ready yet, but I would suggest that people watch the website for that information. This is a walking tour for the exterior, trying to envision the grounds and understand what the original estate looked like, because the Rockland neighborhood has sort of filled it all in with houses and extra streets and things. But we do have information that we'd like to share for people. So we're just figuring out how to deliver that, because that's one where you do require some imagination. You have to be able to visualize something that was there in 1895 and is not there now. And we can help with pictures. So we're compiling some of the support materials to help our participants understand that tour. So yeah, there's a lot of new stuff going on for those who can't do the castle at all, if it's a physical thing or a distance and you can't get here. If you check our website, there is a virtual tour. We hired voice actors, so Joan's voice makes an appearance and James's voice makes an appearance. So if people do want to explore some of the rooms and open up some of the boxes and watch a few little videos and things, that's also available. And that's no charge. That's just on the website. Check it out kind of thing.
That's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Part of what we do is folklore as well. And part of folklore for us, we get into the paranormal side of things as well. Have you guys had any weird interactions in the place, or?
That's a question I probably get 2 or 3 times a day from our visitors, because I think there's a lot of people that are very, very interested in that component. Personally, I have not experienced anything. I've been in the building late at night, and it has a wonderful vibe. I enjoy it. There are people who don't enjoy being in the building as the last person in there locking up. I do. I think it's got a really cool vibe. It's a little bit, I don't want to say freaky, but it can give you pause to wonder what's going on. And then sometimes it's just the wind in the chimneys,
Yeah.
And they're talking to you. So the house is talking to you. So in that sense, the building has a voice. I don't know entity-wise if I've ever seen anything like that. I will say, though, that pretty much every movie that's been filmed here in the last 5 years has some sort of paranormal activity going in. So if you want to see paranormal and the castle, watch the movies.
Okay.
Yeah. The Boy 2, there was one called Siddhar G. We shot one last year. I think it was Netflix. I believe it may be going to big screen, but it was called, working title was The Last Will and Testament of Charles Abernathy. And there was all kinds of entities, and several people lost their lives in there as far as the storyline goes. And they actually had a wonderful stunt where they dropped somebody from the tower all the way down to the main floor. So they had to rig that stunt, and it was a lot of fun watching that. And
That's
so
wonderful.
so there's plenty of paranormal in the movies.
Yeah, just not so much in the castle itself.
Yeah, not that I've noticed. I will say that many of our visitors, I think to some degree it's sensitivity, and many of our visitors say, "Oh, I can't go into that room. There's something about it," or "This place gives me a sense of peace or calm." So our visitors themselves do get their own experiences within that.
Yeah,
We do get some photographs. People will send us images and say, what's this? There's a foot, or there's a little hand here. And then you go to the other side of the piano and take a picture of the mannequin whose foot they've seen from the other direction. So some
yeah,
stuff is like people are feeling things, and that's great. And others where they're taking pictures, you can go, well, no, this is actually what you're seeing. So we have these conversations all the time. It's quite interesting.
it is. Is there options for a private tour at any point for
Yes.
individuals?
Yes, there is. We do events in general, so small weddings, corporate cocktail receptions. We did a private tour for two people the other day off a cruise ship. They wanted access. Our curator took them through. Wanted to focus on a couple of particular aspects about the construction of the building. I believe the fellow was. I don't want to say architecture, but woodworking, construction, something like that. But anyway, so we did a tour for them. So yes, it's entirely possible to do personalized guided tours, and we work with schools. If people can't do, but the students can't make it in, or what have you, because they're on the mainland, we can do virtual tours. So we can take you on a tour of the building and answer questions for you from afar, if that's what you want to do. I
That's
love
wonderful.
technology. Yeah.
Yeah, technology is great.
It is. Yeah, we did a tour for the National Trust of Canada. They wanted to do a Christmas tour, and of course we decorated for Christmas, so we took them on a tour of the building, and people from all over the world, such as yourself, were watching that. So that was really good. I think we had about 80 people sign on to that tour, and it was a typical tour. It took about 45, 50 minutes. We took questions as we went. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. So there are many ways we can do tours, whether it's private or virtual or whatever.
That's excellent. Would you ever do an overnight with people, or is security wise that's not?
I think we did talk about it on and off over the last few years. I think our biggest challenge with that is less about security, but there are no washroom facilities functioning in the building anymore. Before we opened the visitor center, what the military hospital changed in Jones Ensuite was the ladies' washrooms, the men's were down the hall kind of thing.
Yeah,
And in that sense, you could have utilized it because there's running water and sanitary support in there. But the challenge was that 130-year-old pipes, they start to get clogged, and every time the toilet clogs and overflows, it flows through our hand stenciled painted ceiling and onto the artifacts. And so we've decommissioned all of that, and it's now over in the visitor center. So having overnight stay, the number of staff and the additional safety of back and forth in the dark and what have you would prove to be a bit of a challenge for us.
yeah.
That being said, it is something that we've talked about, and I suppose if we could set it up properly, it could be done.
Well, thank you very much for joining me today.
Oh, my pleasure. I really enjoyed the conversation. It's been fun, Alan. Thank you.
We want to thank John Hughes and the Craigdarroch Castle Society for doing this interview, and hope that this was as fun for you, listeners, as it was for us to do. We're working on a bigger project to do with Craigdarroch Castle, and will make an announcement when we are able. We have put links in the show notes for you to find more information on the castle. More is being found as research and restoration continues, so the best way to learn is to visit the castle and do the tours. Thank you again for joining us. Please like, follow, and subscribe on whatever platform you listen on.